A little apple or something.
Just in here.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm at ANROS 2016. I'm with Professor Harry Blagg from UWA. And I just wanted to ask you, because I didn't get a chance to go to your session today, if you could give me a really brief rundown of what you spoke about.
Okay, we've been talking about our ongoing research for ANROS, which is about innovative models of intervention in family violence, but particularly those initiated and run by Aboriginal organisations, particularly Aboriginal women. So it's very community-focused research. We have 3 partner organisations in Fitzroy Crossing, Darwin and Cherbourg in Queensland, and we've been working in partnership with women's agencies in those 3 sites to find out what kind of interesting and novel things are happening on the ground, you know, that often we don't hear about. New ways of working, the ways in which maybe Aboriginal women's organisations define the scope of their work, and as you'll have heard today, they take a rather different approach to the question of family violence from mainstream organisations.
And can you explain what that approach is and how it's different?
Yes. I mean, things work differently in different places, and there's no one model of how to do family violence work in the community. In each of them, though, there's a strong leading role for law and culture. So moving away from a position where law in particular, culture as well, has been seen as the enemy, the part of the problem, that, you know, we're now realising that it's only through strengthening law and culture, working through law and culture, that Aboriginal people are going to be able to join the conversation about family violence. So they work from a cultural base. They tend to engage on a much broader level than we do around domestic violence. So they work with men, which is a bit of a, you know, against the feminist domestic violence orthodoxy. They support men's groups and men's involvement. They see a role for alcohol restriction programs, for the use of ceremonial country, for healing the whole family, not just the perpetrator or the victim. There's a tendency to try and move a bit beyond that kind of thinking to encompass a more holistic and community integrated model. So instead of Aboriginal people just being recruited by mainstream agencies, you know, they're actually leading the charge. And the task, we feel, is for those agencies who normally get involved in domestic violence work, whether it's children's protection or the police or the judiciary and the courts and all these things, to work with Aboriginal people, involve them at every level and every layer of the process, resource them and empower them to run their own programs according to cultural norms. We've taken exactly the opposite approach over the last 10 or 15 years, and that's not worked. In fact, it's compounded the problem. We feel it's time for a paradigm shift, a bit of a sea change. The presenters today that you would have been at the conference today, Dr. Vicky Avain, June Oscar, Eileen Cummings, and so on, Nangala Woodley, have all been talking about the same thing, that we need. It's time for a change. It's time to really start listening to Aboriginal women.
Can you give an example? So you were saying you're working with these organisations that are led by the community themselves. Can you give a practical example of some of the work they do?
Yes, I can. Going back to Fitzroy Crossing, they've got a women's resource centre. Now, normally what we assume family violence intervention to be about is just having a refuge and a legal service. Well, they have them, and they work very well, but that's just not enough. What they've been doing there, they've initiated change around alcohol consumption. They've driven a policy of reducing the availability of strong alcohol. They've developed programs around fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and working with, particularly with younger women. They work with early childhood trauma in their early learning centre, and they also have a kind of an industry branch where they've got, Aboriginal women are able to use their traditional knowledge and knowledge of country to develop up things to sell, painted boab nuts and beautifully dyed fabrics and things, and so that really empowers these women. So that's what I mean by holistic. We've normally associated domestic violence intervention with just arresting him, taking her to the refuge, getting a restraining order, going to court. It's never worked in Indigenous communities. Offers respite, sure, for a while, but it doesn't fix underlying problems. That can only be done at a holistic community level. Yeah? And because Aboriginal people have this distinct culture, we have to kind of work with that rather than against it, which is what we've normally tended to do.
Right. And I'm sorry if I'm asking you to repeat yourself, but
no.
With your research,
yep.
What point is that at?
Well, we've been going for about a year. We've written quite a detailed state of knowledge report, about 30,000 words, and it's available on the ANRO's website, and we've had good feedback about that.
Okay.
We're in the, it's always a bit more of a challenge working in the Aboriginal domain. We've got to wait till the end of the wet season to do things, and but we're doing a round of much more finely grained intervention next, which is talking more to actually Aboriginal women who use the services.
Okay.
About their experiences of family violence, what they want to see happen. Right. I'm going to be talking to men's groups. We're going to go out on women's night patrols and men's night patrols in the Northern Territory, and drill down a little bit deeper than we already are, and start to kind of do some finely grained, finely tuned kind of analysis, put up some models of where we think we need to be headed in the future, particularly with rural and remote communities.
And do you have any hopes or ideas about outcomes from this research?
Oh yes, we have. We've got high expectations that government will listen, and particularly they'll start to do things like fund these organisations to do a long-term job, long-term secure funding, because they struggle to survive in the present economic climate. And I think we need to have some more certainty and security. So we'd like to see investment in family healing services and in intergenerational trauma work with families, have a much more informed and diversionary approach in the criminal justice system that would see people kept more in the community and treated in a more holistic way. So we've got all kinds of ambitious ideas that we'd like to see funded by government.
Great. Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Not at all, it's been a pleasure.